Hello everyone, welcome to this panel event today. I'm really pleased to be chairing this session. We've got a great lineup of speakers and it's a fantastic report that Future Governance Forum have been leading on. So today we've got Theo Blackwell, Chief Digital Officer for Greater London Authority, currently on secondment to the Government Digital Service. We've got Roodhouse joining us from the local Government Association, Director of Strategy and Policy. Welcome, thanks Eve. We've got Josie Cluer, a partner at EY, who's also a member of DCIT's advisory group. And we've got Robbie and Hamida from Future Governance Forum. I'm going to be chairing this panel. How this is going to work is we're going to hear from Robbie first to talk to us about the report and what's in it. Then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to respond to a particular theme in that report. Then I've got some prepared questions that I'd like to ask the panelists with my chair's prerogative, but I'm then going to open it out for a wider Q&A for everyone who's here. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen that you should be able to see. Please do put questions in throughout as people are speaking, and then we'll go to that selection of questions and ask the panelists to respond to some of them. I don't think I've forgotten any logistics. So, Robbie, can I hand over to you?
Thanks, Kate. I'm just going to try and share my screen for a second. Bear with me. Let's have a go at sharing that. How's that looking for people? Is that...
Not full screen, just a flag, Robbie.
Okay. Any better, Hamida?
Yep. Yeah.
Brilliant. Brill. So thanks, Kate. It's great to see so many people joining, and I think that's probably a testament, I guess, to how important getting some of this work right is. I have to say, it is still odd to be talking to a screen and not being able to see all 100+ people's faces, but there we are. So my name's Robbie, and I'm one of the co-authors of the work, and I've spent the last 15 years or so redesigning public services. Before I jump in, I just wanted to say really a huge thank you to everyone that's taken the time, I guess, with us to sort of share their ideas, thoughts, sometimes frustrations, I think over the last kind of like 9 months or so. And I think it's been be fair to say it's been a real sort of labour of love, I think, from lots of people pulling all of this work together. But what's included in this report is, I would say, a real curation of all of those ideas and all of those thoughts. And I hope that we've pulled something together that very much feels of the sector. Like lots of the stuff that's in here is coming from all of the people that we've spoken to and been involved with. Before we dive into some of those panel discussions, I wanted to spend a few minutes really giving you a bit of an overview, like Kate says, of what's included and kind of what we've pulled together in the report for those that haven't had chance yet to sort of look through. And I wanted to say, I guess, lots of the things that you'll find in the report and in the work will feel familiar. There's lots of ideas and recommendations that aren't necessarily new. But I don't know, for me, it feels like there's a real, almost like power, I think, in bringing all of these things together into one place and putting all of this stuff out into the open. And I think particularly right now, feeling like, I suppose, a sort of critical moment across government with lots happening in relation to a digital and reform agenda. And I hope that now is the moment or the time, I guess, to try and make some of this stuff stick. But most importantly, I wanted to highlight really that much of what we're pointing towards, I guess, in this report is already happening in pockets of local government. And there's already brilliant things that are happening. And a lot of that is despite incredibly challenging financial and operating backdrop. That just feels really important to kind of say up front. So what we've got on screen, I guess, is the starting question that we started this work with. So what role should digital and data play in supporting local place-based public service delivery and reform? And as you can imagine, that's an incredibly broad question. So the work itself and what's in the report is incredibly broad in its nature. What I would say though, and maybe this is a spoiler alert for anyone that's not read the report, like it's not just about the tech or it's not just about AI. And that's not to say they're not massively important parts of the puzzle. But what we try to do really is focus this work on what are the wider conditions for change that we need across this agenda, and what does that look like, and what's needed, I guess, across the whole of government, not just local or central. So sort of building off that, I guess, what you'll find in the report are like a few things. So things like how we might strengthen and support collaboration across the sector, how we might think differently about leadership and what does that need to look like within sort of 21st century organisations. What does it look like to collectively influence the software market, and how do we do that together as a sector? And thoughts on, I guess, what some of the huge challenges that we've got around diversity and representation across the workforce. So as you kind of go through the report, you'll see that there's an awful lot in there. There's over, I think, about 60 plus recommendations that we've pulled together. And I think in some senses it could be easy to get lost in all of that list of 60. So what we've tried to do up front in the report is, I suppose, pull together some of the recommendations or things that we felt like were really important or sort of really pivotal, I guess, to sort of highlight. So we've got these 5 here that I've kind of got on screen. So there's one around a sector-wide workforce plan. So how do we come together to build what that plan kind of looks like, and that looks at the gap we've got in digital skills, but also a lot of those issues around diversity and representation that I spoke to. How do we think about what those clearer routes are for new talent to come into the sector, and how do we think creatively about what that looks like and how we go about doing that? Number 2, we've got something on structured pathways for digital practitioners to progress into leadership roles that may not necessarily traditionally be occupied by those from digital backgrounds, and what can we learn from where that's working quite well at the minute, and what can we do around some of that. We've got something around how we create the infrastructure, incentives, and importantly, I think, air cover for councils to de-risk innovation and really shape the software market, and how we go about doing that through collective buying, sandboxing, shared procurement frameworks across the right footprints or the right geographies. Number 4, we sort of pulled out something around bringing together multidisciplinary teams to think about how we develop appropriate digital service standards, and doing that with the sector and making sure that we've got the right people around the table to sort of shape and define what those things are. And then how do we really push to make data sharing and exchange a default rather than an exception? Starting to think about what's needed around some of that, and in particular, not just thinking about some of the technical issues that we've got around some of that, but also some of the cultural things that exist. One of the other big, I guess, recommendations or things that we've highlighted in the report that you'll see as we're going through centres on this idea, I guess, that we have a what we've described, I guess, as a missing middle in the government digital ecosystem, and I guess like a missing part which more effectively enables us to connect local and central government and support the whole sector to collaborate, share learning, and better act and influence as one joined up sector. I think Hamida's going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But I guess what we've proposed for that missing middle is almost like two parts. So the first part is this idea of a light touch coordinating body or institute, and I guess I'm emphasising the light touch part of that. That ideally is responsible for convening and coordinating the sector, holding a backlog of common problems or common challenges, developing common technology components, and being the joined up interface between central government and the software market. The second bit we've got in there is developing a series of what we've kind of called strategic centres for service innovation, which is a bit of a mouthful, but those things, I guess, focusing on like two particular areas or two particular things. So one is looking at place-based innovation. So how do we innovate and collaborate across a particular geography? And we've put some options and ways that we might think about what that geography is a bit later in the report. And two, for each of those centres to be looking at almost like a what works centre or centre of excellence, where each is developing a practice around a particular challenge or a particular service, for example, housing or waste services. Like I say, Hamida's going to touch on it a bit more later, and we can come back to some of the questions. I guess in relation to that, I wanted to say, like, we know that there are gaps and limitations in that as a proposal, and it's one that we think needs further development and further testing, particularly thinking about what might be the appropriate funding options for some of that, and like I say, what are the number of geographies or spreads of those centres. Secondly, I just wanted to say around some of it, like, it's not about adding more bureaucracy into the system. For us, it's more about aligning and coordinating in a more effective and efficient way, and really about creating the infrastructure to collaborate so that we can bolster capacity and capability across local government. As you kind of go through, I guess, the rest of the report, we structured it into sort of 6 areas. So we've got infrastructure, learning and collaboration, organisational and political leadership, capacity, capability and skills, standards, procurement contracts and market shaping, data exchange and maturity. I'm not going to go through them all, obviously, now in detail, but as you read through each one, what we try to do is develop a vision statement, a 2030 vision statement for each of those things that can try and make that feel a bit more tangible and bring that to life a bit more. And then the 60 recommendations or so that are in the report are categorised against those 6 themes. Lastly, one of the biggest things, I guess, that we heard throughout the work was that there isn't a clear sense of who should be doing what across the system. There's a lot of duplication, fragmentation, confusion that's happening in right the way across the system. So in the report, we've had a go at outlining a bit of an overview of what a set of roles and responsibilities might look like for those that are working in different parts of the system. Like that is really high level. And I guess we've put that in there, not that it's anything definitive, but is almost a provocation, I guess, is a starting point to think about what we might be doing, or each organisational part of the system might be doing. And then I guess just before I hand back to Cate and we can get into some of the discussions, I just wanted to say, I think the work really is a starting point for me on bringing the sector together and thinking about how do we create a blueprint for local government. I think it's making sure that local government isn't an afterthought in wider plans, but actually, like, the roadmap, is something that's really directed and really co-owned by local government and the sector. So thanks. Over to you, Cate.
Thank you, Robbie. Thanks for that really comprehensive overview and pulling out those key themes. As you say, there's an awful lot in this report, over 60 recommendations, and I agree with you. It's about the power of drawing all of this together into one place as a starting point for conversation. So on that note, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to respond to a specific theme in the report rather than try and respond to the whole thing, because as you say, there's a lot in there. So if I can come to you first, Theo, quite obviously, I guess I'm going to ask you to respond to the data maturity theme of the report, given your background and experience.
Hi, I'm sorry, my camera is saying, oops, something went wrong. Would you like me to reply just with my voice, or would you like me to fix my camera whilst you turn to a colleague?
Why don't I go to someone else and you can
Okay,
your camera
I
in the
shall
background
return.
or be, yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. In which case, Eve, is that okay? I might come to you next
Yeah,
to
of course.
respond on, particularly around organisational and political leadership. And we talked about this last week, didn't we, when we were discussing the panel event. Over
Yeah.
to you.
Thanks, Kate, and hello, everybody. My name's Eve Roodhouse, and I'm the Director of Strategy and Policy at the LGA. I've been here for 7 months. I was most recently Chief Officer of Culture and Economy at Leeds City Council, so I've also got very recent experience of working in a large unitary authority. I did want to just very briefly say who we are at the LGA, because I did notice in the report that we were down as being a government body. We're not a government body. We're a membership organisation for local government, and we sort of exist to sort of strengthen local government so that communities can thrive. And we work really hard to sort of champion and be the voice of local government so that local government secures the resources, the powers, and the support it needs to deliver the best possible outcomes. And over the last 3 years, we've developed a really strong capability around digital and cyber. And the LGA that you might know of the past is not the LGA of today, and certainly won't be the LGA of the future. We as an organisation are learning and growing and have a really clear focus on data, digital technology and innovation, and what our role needs to be in supporting our members going forwards. In relation to the report, I think it's a really great report, and we're really supportive of all the findings in it. And if I focus on the sort of leadership piece in particular, I think the observations are really strong observations. From being a senior leader in a large council, one of the personal reflections I would make is that I was sort of one of a few people that were confident at the higher levels in the organisation that wasn't a digital specialist, being able to ask questions about digital technology and data and driving change. And it's still very common that a lot of weight lies on the CDIO in a authority to drive that change. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. And had I sort of still been in that role in Leeds, I think this would have been quite a useful tool to be able to have conversations with colleagues around that. I think the counter, I think, because you are asking us to challenge the findings as well. Just as you know, a director of adult social care might not make a good chief executive, so CDIO might not make a good chief executive. Local authorities have really, really wide-ranging remits. 800 different services are operated. And I think we need to be careful not to obsess about how many CDIOs we might get into chief exec roles. And I think instead we need to really, really kind of try and crack the nut about how we encourage leaders to really understand they've got to grow and learn around digital data and technology, and it's got to be fundamental to anyone that becomes a chief exec or indeed a director in a local authority to understand how it affects them. We've had experience in the LGA of doing specific learning programs on digital technology, and it's been difficult actually to get politicians to sign up to them because they're busy, and leaders. It's better to embed it in overall leadership programs and mainstream it. So I think that's kind of a key sort of learning in that respect. And the other thought I want to lob over the fence on this leadership point is, you know, don't think about it in the silo of going through local authority either. When you work in a local authority, our local authorities convene and collaborate across the public sector really effectively. And given the level of change and the fact that we want to shift the way that people think about design of services and how they interact with the citizen, wouldn't it be interesting to think about how leaders across fire, policing, NHS, local government convene themselves in place to be able to really upskill themselves around digital, AI and so on, and to think about that in their local, in their sort of local context. And a final comment I just want to make in terms of opening remarks is to caution against us kind of jumping to thinking about institutional solutions or organisational structures. The pace at which we need to move and the changes that are happening in local government and the NHS mean that above all else, we need to think about the power of networked communities and about the structures that already exist and how we can leverage them really effectively. We've not got a lot of money in the system, so make sure that we don't duplicate, we don't create a situation where we need to relearn, reconnect, re-engage, pay attention to what's happening in places already, and encourage and empower them based on what they know in their place works, to really drive this and support each other across the country to be able to do this. So hopefully some helpful kind of observations to kick us off.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Eve. We really appreciate the challenge as well of the report. That feels like a really good point at which to bring Josie in, because Josie, we were talking earlier about skills and capabilities, weren't we? I wonder if you wanted to go next, and then I'll come to Theo after that, who I can see has fixed his camera.
Brilliant, thanks. And congratulations, Robbie, fantastic report. So thanks for all the work on it. I guess just before I talk about skills, I just wanted to put a framing question to all of us, really, which is, as we read this report and have this conversation, do we fundamentally believe that the technology that's in our hands now, at this moment, with all the new AI and generative AI and all the rest of it, does that have the power? Do we believe that has the power to fundamentally change everything? The way we live, the way we work, the way we support citizens? Because if we do believe that, and I do, I think we're in the equivalent of a kind of creation of the internet moment. If we do believe that, I think we also have to challenge ourselves on, generationally, are we stepping up that challenge? Are we taking the opportunity to support citizens in the best possible way and change the way we live and work for the better? So it's in that context, let's talk about skills. So the report brilliantly says 2% of the local government workforce are digital data technology specialists. If you believe that the technology we've got at the moment gives us the opportunity to fundamentally change the way we live and work and support citizens, that's not enough, right? That's not enough. It's also not enough against benchmarks, right? So NHS is more like 4%, central government's more like 5%, though they last week said we're going to double that to 10%. That's more like where the private sector is, 10, maybe 12%. So there's a big question for us about how do we take that to 2% and stretch, and get more digital specialists. And there's lots to be said about how we recruit them, how we train them, how we reward them, and how we keep them in local government and the wider public sector. And I really agree with the recommendation about using apprenticeships and digital apprenticeships as a route into local government. But the 2% is only 2%, and even if it's 10%, it's only 10%, right? We need to also focus on everybody else, the 98%. And I think there's a really important question about how do we help everybody else get the digital literacy, the digital fluency to be using these new tech tools, including AI, in every task and every day. So everybody, every task, every day. And I think that not just in local government, right, across the piece, I think we're a way away from that. So how do we get people there? And I think there is a massive upskilling role to do to help people build the confidence to be able to play with these tools, to be able to deploy these tools, be able to use these tools. And nowhere more, to build on Eve's point, nowhere more than at the very top of organisations, where I think we've got a big job of work to do to build confidence and curiosity and skills for leaders in local government and across the wider public sector to be really driving digital transformation and digital change and be advocates for how these new digital technologies can fundamentally change the services that are provided for citizens and change the way we live and work for the better.
Thank you, Josie. And actually your opening challenge around, do we believe that AI has the fundamental power to change lives, leads me to another question, which is, if we believe that, then what do our institutions need to look like in order to harness that power? Because my hypothesis is they probably need to look very different. Theo, can I come to you next?
Certainly, yes. Look, I've been involved in the local government collaboration sprint here at GDS. My normal job is Chief Digital Officer for London, and so I was given the opportunity to be seconded to GDS for a couple of months to run this sprint. And it comes at a really important time. First of all, the new government and GDS has set out a new vision for modern digital government, and one that transcends Whitehall. And that's the first important change that's happened. GDS in its various manifestations and CDDO and other elements had either explicitly or explicitly excluded local government from their scope. If you look at the last CDDO strategy, it literally says this is not for local government. Or it kind of had obliquely engaged with local government. So the big change is a much more expansive one government approach to public service transformation. And secondly, the new GDS represents a totally different proposition. It's not just a suite of digital platforms like Notify and Pay, or even, login. Good as these all are, it also combines the capabilities of the Chief Technology Officer. So that brings us into discussions about IT market reform, again, not just for Whitehall, but for local government. And it brings in skills and capabilities, again, designed largely for Whitehall, but could be of use to colleagues in local government, and opening the door up for that. Brings in the National Data Library, which will be a platform and a program that will link up public service data for the first time, and also understand the needs of public service data users in its design. So it's a really, really impactful opportunity for local government in that space. And it also brings together i.ai. So that's a team of about 40 or 50 engineers who've been doing some alphas. Again, the pipeline's all stuffed with things for Whitehall, like, Redbox and Humphrey and Cate and things like that. But it creates an opportunity for local government, which itself has been experimenting in the AI space for some time and has some really good learnings there. So the new GDS starts a new conversation here. So as part of my sprint, I've been talking to about 250 digital practitioners, essentially testing a bunch of hypotheses and developing a key set of recommendations, which I'll be putting to senior decision makers. The challenge that we have in this sector is that a lot of what we know is the problem is locked away. It's locked away in our heads, our workshops, our professional networks. And that's why this report is really, really important, because it brings those elements which have striking similarity to a lot of the hypotheses that I've been working with, because they are the natural ones you would go to. This report brings them all together in a digestible form for decision makers. And I think if our sprint does one thing, it elevates what are often technical questions or interpreted as technical questions by non-digital decision makers into the public service delivery space. That effectively the lack of data sharing, low capabilities of local government, the fact that we don't have any connective tissue that allows us to do knowledge transfer, these are all major public service reform challenges. And therefore have to be seen in the light of, if you want to reform how public services are delivered and serve citizens well, and also give those who serve citizens the tools that they need, then this needs to be taken far more seriously. So our sprint is sort of coming to an end. We need to maintain that pressure throughout this spending round, where the money's being decided for the next 3 years, to ensure that local government transformation has its place. And I would say, one thing, well, there are two observations that I've got from local government here. Firstly, in the past, the idea that central government coming up with something is an imposition on local authorities is not where a lot of digital practitioners are at. It's like, we want to work together and as long as local government has a seat in at the table, that we are in the discussion, we are working with with central government not being imposed on, then the idea of leadership in this space is something that people have told us that they want. And secondly, and this is something that it doesn't take long actually sitting in Whitehall for you to experience this. There's always this kind of idea of like, we've come up with some ideas, we must sort of tell people about them and get them to do things. It sort of like comes with the furniture, really. But there's so much that central government can learn from local government. It's a two-way dialogue. And I don't sort of say that to be sort of like glib or just to get the audience to warm to what I'm saying, but literally when we're talking about the delivery of artificial intelligence, local authorities have been doing this and have a range of use cases, from the old smart city stuff through to generative AI. It's happening right now. The problem is that it's duplicated and knowledge transfer is low. And that is definitely something that we need to start to address.
Thank you, Theo. And yeah, really important to bring out that a new conversation is a two-way dialogue. It's not one side telling the other side something. And I was just reflecting on what you were talking when you were talking about platforms earlier, and about how welcoming we were at Hackney when I was at Hackney about using the platforms that GDS was building so that we weren't duplicating work that was already happening, things like Notify and Pay. Hamida, I'm going to come to you next. I think it's a really good point to dwell a little bit more on the missing middle that's highlighted in the report.
Thanks so much, Cate. Hi, everyone. My name's Hamida Ali. I'm the Head of Learning and Practice here at the Future Governance Forum. Really grateful to our panelists for joining us today. And if I could echo Robbie's thanks to everyone who participated in this work. We hope that this work really reflects their voices. And on behalf of FGF, I'd also like to thank Robbie Bates for his very hard work and thought in communicating the real complexity of what we heard in such an accessible way. Here at the Future Governance Forum, our focus is very squarely on the how of practical implementation over the what of policy development, and this work really reflects our organisational focus. There's so much in this report, as others have said, over 60 recommendations across 6 themes, but as Cate said, I wanted to pick up on our biggest takeaway, perhaps, of this missing middle. And throughout the work, we've really been balancing the rightful autonomy within local government, each council run by locally elected people with their own vision for their places, with the duplication that fragmentation of the sector can result in, and which can potentially really rob the sector of the capacity to build a more collective voice together on sharing risk, on service reform, on problem solving across the same things that councils are facing, a more collective voice for the sector in that conversation with central government on how the market works with the sector and the extent to which you can leverage the utility of data within a wider footprint. And this idea of the missing middle, which was coined by Robbie, describes the separation and lack of collaboration between central government and local government on digital transformation, and the paucity of infrastructure to facilitate that co-working, sharing and collaboration that other panelists have reflected on. And arguably, this isn't particular to digital. It perhaps reflects the broader historical challenges and silos between how central and local government operate, sort of alongside each other rather than more connected. But it also makes itself very felt in this context, and hopefully the ambitions that are in the English Devolution white paper will help tackle that lack of connective tissue that's been talked about. Our proposal around the missing middle is for a combination of that sort of regional centre of service innovation with a coordinating force to help fill that missing middle while holding that balance between central and local legitimacies. And for us, it was really importantly rooted in in regional geographies, partly genuinely to give that additional capability and capacity, but also to help tackle the geographic inequality of distribution of digital skills and opportunities. So as Robbie said, those regional centres would have a dual role, both of place and practice-based innovation. So additional capacity and capability supporting councils in that vicinity, but also with a thematic specialism which could contribute to the whole development of the whole sector, whatever that might be on social care or housing or public health. And we're also suggesting a light touch body could help bring some of that important coordination to help convene the sector, to help facilitate greater collective activity, whether that's in terms of procurement or market engagement or best practice sharing across the sector. And I think we're sharing this work at a really timely point. It's such a big moment, as Eve was reflecting on, for subnational government, with so much change on the table: devolution, local government reorganisation, the government's mission-driven test, learn and grow agenda promoting public service reform, and central government's own digital plans that Theo's been reflecting on. And we think there's a lot in this work which has helped contribute to that packed agenda for local government. And perhaps one of those, perhaps the counter or alongside what Eve was talking about, one of those considerations is thinking about, from first principles, of the role of digital in a 21st century functioning institution, with the setting up of a number of new strategic authorities, rather than being the last thing that's thought about. Could the role that digital plays in the organising of those new institutions, perhaps could that be one of the first considerations? And thinking again about Eve's good challenge about structures over what's already in place, and very sensible questions that I've already seen in the chat about some of the developments we've seen from government in decisions about non-government bodies. I think from our point of view, this is very much about getting more of the kinds of skills that we lack, as Josie was talking about, closer to places to really empower and enable local government to a greater degree than perhaps is the case at the moment.
Thanks, Hamida. And thank you all of the panelists. That was really, really insightful and useful challenge, and really good reflections on different themes of the report. I'm going to open out to questions from people on the call. I can see some in the Q&A already, but please put some more questions in if you're wanting to ask something. Whilst you're doing that, I've got a couple of questions for the panelists that I'd like to ask. And my first one is actually to Robbie. Something I'm curious about is, what leapt out at you when you were doing the research that you really didn't expect to hear?
Thanks, Kate. Maybe not sort of didn't expect to hear, but I guess the bits that felt particularly like they resonated, I guess, or like needed more work shaking around it. I guess one of them was like you were talking about, Josie, like the idea of like what are the skills and what does the workforce look like in the future? And I think I referenced it, but like, how do we think about that sector-wide workforce plan? Like, and how do we start doing that now? And what's the right order and the right sequencing, particularly for leaders in local authorities? Like, what is the order that needs to happen in, and at what pace? I thought was particularly interesting or jumped out. And then the other one for me is like cracking that procurement challenge. And it's not like the finance and the procurement bit sits on the sidelines. Like, how do we really integrate that part of it into the conversation? So it's not just a sort of digital teams and service teams. It's like, what does it look like as a whole council response? I think to rewiring the way that our organisations and councils need to work in the future, I would say, Kate.
Thanks, Robbie. And Eve, if I come to you next, when we were chatting last week about the report, we were talking a lot about the institution building skills and capabilities that we're going to need. And that picks up also on Josie's point around, are we entering a new era here? And my reflection there that, if we are, then what are the institutions we're going to need? And I think that sort of neatly wraps up that whole idea of the missing middle. What might the missing middle look like? I was wondering if you wanted to come back on that.
So first of all, this is really exciting. I could continue this conversation all day based on some of the comments from other panelists. So I think for anyone that kind of doesn't really get the English Devolution white paper, the combination of things in it amount to the biggest changes for local government in 50 years. There are 21 areas that are going through local government reorganisation, and building on Hamida's point, like last week I was at District Councils Network in a room with chief execs and leaders that are leaning into this right now, and the great thing was that we were talking about digital And they need to think about that, they need to bring that forwards. And at the LGA, we've done some discovery work already that we are then going to shape into our next stages of how we can support those organisations. And we're really kind of taking that into discussions with MHCLG, because the previous, reorganisations that took place in the last couple of years, there's a lot we can learn from those areas. And there's an opportunity when 21 areas are doing at the same time to really kind of lean in and support them to do it. And on the CA point, Hamida, I really agree. There's an opportunity for the new CAs to really put this at the heart of their thinking and not have to retrospectively build it in. And, on that, I would just remind people that we need to be cautionary about thinking that CAs or strategic authorities are the right sort of vehicle in some of this. So they don't deliver the same services as local authorities. They don't cover the whole country at the moment. They vary massively in their maturity. From Greater Manchester is very different to York and North Yorkshire, a combined authority at the moment. So that goes back to my earlier point about, it's a dynamic system that's going to be changing a huge amount over the next 5 years. So the power of networked communities and how we capitalise on structures is going to be really, really vital in that context. And the other thing I wanted to sort of say is that I agree about this point about the missing middle, but I also want to say the local government is actually exemplary at peer learning. We do peer reviews facilitated for the LGA where peers go and look at other councils and look at, how they're performing. And we've done little bits of that with Cyber 360s. I would really like to see that model evolve so that the experts in digital were doing really good peer reviews, and we're funded to do that, because government should be interested in whether councils are properly considering digital. So that I think would be massive step change if you said, actually, peer review should either, the existing peer review needs to have a very specific digital element to it, or we need to have, it's that important that we need to have every council have a peer review around digital, and that being funded. There's more I could say, but you just really got me kind of thinking from the comments from Hamida and Theo.
Thanks, Eve. And it's always nice as a chair when someone says this is really exciting. Hopefully it's really interesting for the audience as well. There are so many questions in the chat now in the Q&A that to pick from, some really great questions. I'm just going to pick a couple that really stick out to me. The first is a question around the fact that local government faces unique challenges that central government doesn't. I've got a slight pushback on that. I'm not sure how unique those challenges are. So actually my question is, how unique is local government, and what is it that makes it unique in this case? And the second question is around, how do we break down some of the recommendations in this report into smaller milestones so that we can show progress? What's the next most important thing that we should do? Who would like to come in to respond to either of those questions? I'm slightly putting you on the spot now. Theo.
What makes local government unique is when I started at GDS, I actually did a session and I brought in this CIO to tell people about local government, because I sensed that the knowledge was actually quite low, because we hadn't had permission to engage. And its uniqueness is in the sheer range of services that it provides to citizens and its proximity to those citizens. So, and that breeds in itself a level of complexity, which the nearer you get to it, you could be quite overawed by. But those who are in it, in local government, deal with that complexity all the time, and have sort of reached peace with it. So it's kind of interesting. Sort of local government is unique in itself because of the nature of it, and it also has a uniqueness in terms of like how people perceive it, especially from central government, which isn't necessarily as near to the actuality as it should be. So
I've got
that's one question I'm answering.
Thanks, Theo. Eve, and then Josie.
So that's I moved into local government from the NHS 7 years ago, And the thing that I absolutely love about local government is that huge variety, and the intellectual dance you have to do as a leader in local government is huge. And every day you face into immediate issues where you have got a resident or a business that is asking you to solve a problem, or a cultural institution whose roof started leaking and needs some help with the money for that. You know, it's relentless, that type of stuff, whilst also having to think really strategically and long term and lead strategically. The other thing I'd say that I think is brilliant about local government, that was my sort of thing that I really kind of learned to love and understand, is the convening power. In your place, you can invite everyone to come to you and bring people together in a way that can be incredibly powerful without needing to have loads of money. You know, you can, you know, on the skills point, you know, that's in the report about digital skills, I personally led a load of work to develop a future talent plan for Leeds, which we co-created. And from the back of that, we brought digital partners together with our educators in our area. We started to develop a kind of a whole ecosystem where our FE college started to deliver more digital T-levels. Our anchor institutions started to engage with our FE college about getting people in there. This is what's really powerful, and what, you know, gets you energized as a leader in local government, is that ability to do that. And I think it, you know, that's where we could be proving the power of a digitally led approach to that, if we can get the money that we have got and the networks we've got in the right places, in the constraints that we've got.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to bring Josie in, and then Hamida, I'm going to come to you for sort of what's next for Future Governance Forum. And then I'm going to come back to each of the panelists. I've got a question for each of you, which I asked you to reflect on at the start of the panel, which is what's your hope for what will be different for users of local government services if we are successful as a result of this report in transforming the sector? Josie, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said about local government being unique, and I think the challenge is there are things, that doesn't mean there aren't things that local government can learn from elsewhere, right? And so local government isn't the only organisation with cost pressure at the moment. It's not the only organisation struggling to get adoption of digital tools, with skills gaps, etc., etc. So I think that there is an opportunity to look outwardly. And I guess the thing that we see, well, I see quite a lot, is a lot of activity that is sort of proof of concept going on, which is all very exciting and very good. But is the deployment of scarce resource in those areas that are going to make the biggest difference to citizens, or whatever the priorities are, but let's say citizens, right? So I think there is an imperative, particularly when resources and skills are tight, to say, to focus energies where it's going to have the biggest impact. Then just really quickly on what's the next thing, I think everybody can go away and be curious, right? Like, have a little play around with some of these tools, right? See if you can use them in your day-to-day lives. Be a bit careful about data before Theo kicks me under the virtual table. And also collaborate. If you've built something cool, if you've had a great idea, like, share it on all the various networks and institutions with colleagues, because they're facing the same challenges. And then last, I think now's the moment for a bit of courage as well, and courage in the leadership to say, now is the moment, right? Now is the time to really invest and say, we are going to be the council, we're going to be the generation of leaders who really uses this fantastic technology to transform our services to citizens.
Thank you. Hamida, before I come to you to talk about next steps for the report and for Future Governance Forum, I'm just going to go round very quickly in one sentence. What do you hope will be different for users of council services, local government services, if we are successful in transforming the sector? What will that look like? Theo, can I come to you first? This is the why, right? This is the why.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier lives, isn't it? it's less time spent negotiating an often complex state. I also think that quite a lot of the time we talk about B2B stuff, but it's also B2C stuff, but it's also B2B. It's those who serve them. It's those who serve the citizens will be able to do their jobs better. So both of those.
Eve, can I come to you next?
So great you went with Theo first, because I agree with Theo. And building on Theo, I would like to, my hope is that we still have local government that isn't just a social care service. Because actually, if we get digital right and we put digital first, it means that we'll be able to be as effective as we possibly can in continuing to be able to deliver all of the other services that local government really needs to deliver, whether that's leisure, culture, business support, like planning, transport. Local government has such a big part to play. Let's make it sustainable for the future. Let's understand that digital is a way to help do that.
Thanks, Eve. Robbie?
Yes,
Deep
similar
into the
thoughts.
research.
Well, yeah, I think for me, like, I think enabling people to have to not repeat their stories, I think repeatedly into organisations, I think feels really, really important. And there's a whole piece for me on what can digital do in enabling those that may not otherwise, but like engage with democracy, like and engage in decision making and things in their place. I would say, Cate.
And Josie?
Great, everyone, star on the great ideas.
Sorry.
And I agree with all of them. And how about this as an ambition then? How about we say, gosh, if only my bank were as good at dealing with my queries and my questions as my council up the road. If only their app was as good.
Nice. And Hamida, over to you for what do you hope to be different? And what's next? What's next for the report?
Thank you, Cate. Yeah, really appreciate that. I wouldn't have said it as well as Josie did, but absolutely better experiences for residents, whether you're in a car park trying to book a space or whether you're trying to get an education, health and care plan for your child, like better experiences of council services for sure. Secondly, more of a voice for your place in that national conversation. And then finally, more evenly distributed opportunities for work in this area within our communities. Those would be mine based on the work that we did. And in terms of sort of next steps, so we make some suggestions for some more immediate next steps, including sort of members of the sector being able to come together and reflect on, what would from their point of view within local government be the right digital blueprint for local government in that conversation. But I think what we're also trying to say is that change needs to be made with and developed by the local government sector as a whole, together with central government, and actually within the full range of government departments, which all have a role to play. From our point of view, we'll be looking to share the work as widely as we can and to share that report with colleagues at different tiers of government. And we'd certainly like to play our part in keeping that conversation going in the full range of areas that we cover. And we'll also be looking for opportunities to develop the work further. We always felt from the start that there was going to be so much breadth, and so opportunities to sort of pursue things in a bit more depth. And this work from a Future Governance Forum perspective is part of what we call our impactful devolution focus. So devolution, not just for its own sake, but that results in really meaningful positive change in people's lives. And in that work, we're looking at how to sort of meaningfully and permanently devolve power, not perhaps just to the next layer down, but perhaps more to sort of local government and closer to the ground as well. And through that work stream, we're also working with the Centre for Progressive Policy and Metro Dynamics on a new network of combined and local authorities, really focused on both inclusive growth and public service reform. And we'll certainly be looking forward as we sort of start and develop that network to explore this topic with them.
Thanks, Hamida. There are loads of fantastic questions and comments in the Q&A, which I know that we can capture and look at and reflect on afterwards. If people on the call have further thoughts and reflections, how should they feed them back? What's the best way for them to do that? Hamida, Robbie.
Thanks, Cate. There is if colleagues can visit the our website where we have the online reader. If you scroll down to the bottom, there'll be an opportunity to leave some comments. We've tried to sort of work in the open from our perspective in doing this work, and we really wanted to find a way to be able to capture reactions and thoughts. So it's we've not done this before in the way that we've published a report before, so it's a new approach for us. So welcome colleagues in trying out that system, and hopefully we'll receive people's comments. But yeah, really welcome thoughts and reflections.
Thank you very much. So it just leaves me to thank the panel for all the insights and challenges and thoughts. That was a really great discussion. Thank you so much all for being with us today. And thank you for everyone who's joined us.